Hello there, everybody. I am Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox, and thanks for joining me here on episode number 82 of the weekly Ratchet. It is November 2nd, 2025, which means it is the end of daylight savings time, which means I have no idea when or where I am, but I do know what I need to do, and that's talk all about board games. Let's do so right here on the weekly Ratchet. Yes, hello everyone. My drum skills continue to improve. I've been having a blast playing that drum set. Hey, welcome back to the Weekly Ratchet. I apologize for the week of absence, I think, and I'm not entirely sure, but that might be the first episode I have missed all year. I have tried to make it a point to get back on track and do things every week, but I just didn't get to play any games in this past week. And I'll explain why real quick. I'm going to brief through this because we do have a lot of games to talk about. I have made a couple comments in the past couple of weeks kind of complaining a little bit about my job. I think like most people, I don't like having a job, but I gotta have a job. This takes, some money to make happen. Anyways, so this past week I quit my job. And in fact, for the moment, I am unemployed. However, I did things on the up and up. I turned in a 2-week notice. This has been marinating for a little bit. But anyways, I'm taking the next week off. For the first time ever in my life, I'm taking a week off between jobs. I start a new job on November 10th. Still here in the area. Of course, we're still looking to move to a house that we'll be buying, but we won't be moving out of the area. I'll still be doing what I do, just in a different sort of part of the industry. Still be working in construction projects, construction management as a project control scheduler. However, it is a full-time back in the office job. I have been frankly loving remote work for over 5 years, and it comes to an end, and I'm quite bummed about that. I don't know exactly what that means yet for the channel. We're going to get back to that maybe in the next week. But anyways, I didn't get to play anything last week. There was a lot going on with work. I was out of town a lot the second to last week of work. This past week, I've gotten to play some stuff, and we're going to chat about it. And I even have at least one game to talk about. I, of course, meant one new game to talk about. I didn't want to refilm that whole segment. Anyways, this is Epics, Course of Cultures. Yes, it is pronounced epics, not epochs. Epoch can be used in the English language. However, when the plural gets involved, it has to be epics, said the internet. So this is this is now the full release version. This is a Kickstarter game that ran through actually 2 years ago, I think. I gotta actually find out when this was supposed to be delivered. I don't feel like it's late, but 2 years feels like a long time. We actually played this at the Cabin Con with my friends at our old Airbnb cabin last spring, so like April of 24. Now, of course, that was before it landed on Kickstarter, so I did a preview video for it. It went to Kickstarter, did well. This is from Ice Makes, and the designer is Jeffrey CCH. He's done the games like Age of Galaxy, Age of Innovation. He did Terrorscape, I think is the name of that game, with the large 3D house, and it's kind of like a narrative horror kind of a game, which is hugely popular. I think it's called Terrorscape. That may not be the name of it, and if it's not, I apologize. But anyways, this is the same designer and same company. And so I did a preview of this, and this is my copy. They sent me a copy of this as sort of my reward, for doing that video. And this was like an all-in pledge. So I have all the deluxe components. I don't quite have it organized. That's why this is just the lid. But anyways, it is a civilization game. It is a game where you kind of have a player board. You have a little bit of an asymmetrical ability based on which nation you've sort of chosen to start with. You've got these innovation or technology cards that kind of come out. You have to invent 3 things in each of the 3 epics of the game. There's also a large kind of hexagonal based map that you're expanding across, and you've got to put out little towns and villages, and you've got, you can even kind of wage war against each other to capture castles or cities or whatever from each other. I don't remember a whole bunch of the rules. I do know that the rule book was a little rough, and I did take a look at this one, and it doesn't look to be a hell of a lot better, if I'm honest. But the game was pretty neat. Now, the one thing that I do want to say, I have not gotten to play this version at all. I barely got to open it and take a look at it. But when we played this through the prototype, it said that you could not invent less than 3 inventions in a round, that you had to invent 3 things. I took that to read 3 or more things. Now, the inventions that you get are going to give you ongoing abilities, maybe some engine building things. They also flush you with a bunch of resources each time you invent one. They kind of give you a little bit of a rule-breaking ability plus some resources. What I didn't find out until I found out from them after the fact, after their Kickstarter had run and everything, was that you only get to invent exactly 3 things, no more, no less. And now in the rulebook it says you must invent exactly 3 times, which I can still see it as, well, can I invent more? Well, no. But the thing was that because those inventions also gave you a lot of resources, they provided the fuel for your engine to sort of keep running. And we would often invent 6 things because you have 6 turns in each epic. So we were inventing up to 18 possible inventions when you're only supposed to make 9. And at least I think those are the numbers, again, if I remember. And so I am a little worried about how much tighter and how much more difficult this game might be if you only get to invent half as much stuff as we were typically inventing, and thus are getting much less resources. Anyways, that's enough for this one. I do want to check it out. I'm hoping in this next week of being on a personal vacation, maybe I can do that, because I did like the game. I'm just a little nervous about it. So that is Epic's Course of Cultures. Okay, that is it for new games. That's the only thing, believe it or not, in 2 weeks, the only thing that's come in, I've been trying so hard not to buy games because there's just stuff everywhere in this room and it's starting to kind of piss me off a little bit. Anyways, let's go ahead and get the question of the week. All right, here we go. Last week I asked you to tell me, what do you notice first about a new board game? I'm thinking about walking through a game room or a gaming event, a game meetup, a convention, whatever, and you see people playing something and something about it catches your eye. Or maybe you're going through a store. Maybe they have a little demo table set up and that catches your eye. What's the first thing that jumps out at you? And I was actually surprised. I did not get a lot of consistent answers. I got answers I kind of expected to see, but I expected to see a lot of the same thing, and I really didn't, which is great. We got some variety here. Let's go ahead and kick it off with Just Joe Blogs, who said the board, if there is one, and said that nothing worries him more than a cluttered-looking game board, citing La Granja as a game where the board mostly tells you what you need to know for your turn. I haven't gotten to check out La Granja. I haven't heard a lot of good things about that one. Need to check that out, but I completely agree with you. There's nothing scarier than seeing a board and there's just art all over the place and sort of icons all over the place. You're like, what is this? How are we ever going to be able to figure out something like this? Maybe I should stay away. That makes sense. Teshra said he notices the insert and storage system, noting whether it was designed thoughtfully or if it looks like, quote, a shit show, end quote. Beyond that, he said it's the rulebook, and within that specifically, a good inventory and index of the components. Yeah, I was not surprised to see the rulebook on this list pretty quick. Of course, that's not something that you normally get to see right away when it's sitting on a table, but you might like, oh, hey, can I just flip through the rulebook real quick? And you kind of look, yeah, this looks messy. But I certainly can appreciate that as well. CR Poll said the theme, as certain themes will turn him off from a game. For abstract card games, he added then that it's a matter of concise rules in the rulebook. And yeah, another comment on the rulebook, again, not surprising. I actually expected to see more of that. But yeah, that is definitely, I think, something that will turn away an awful lot of people if they cannot figure out the rulebook. And that was definitely that is one of those things when I'm looking at a Kickstarter, I will try and download the rulebook if I'm on the fence. Like if the theme doesn't catch me at the game appearance, if the designer, if all that kind of stuff, and I'm not sure, I'll try and find the rulebook. And if that looks like a mess, then I don't back. That's kind of as close as I can get to it from that angle. Nell, a first-time poster, said they look first for the type of game and its mechanisms, and knowing that it's a trick-taker, party, or dexterity game, to name a few, means they can eliminate that title right away. That is actually one of the first things I will look for myself. Now, you can't always tell the mechanisms and such while it's just sitting on a table, but I may pick up my phone, go to BGG, and check that list of mechanisms that has been assigned to that title. And if I see things like a lot of dice chucking, area majority, area control, push your luck is one that I kind of tend to shy away from, or a lot of take that stuff, that might be a game that I avoid. Even if I do like the designer or the publisher or the theme, I may still kind of decide, no, look, I still don't think this game is going to be for me. I will play a dexterity game, I'll play a party game, But I'm looking for this stuff that I can play over and over and over again, the kind of games I'm going to love to really sink my teeth into, play a bunch of times, get to know very well, maybe even enjoy solo. And if it's a game that, okay, yeah, I played it once or twice, that's great, I don't really need to play it anymore, but I bought it, well, then shit. So I can definitely agree with this one. And thank you for your comment. Welcome to the channel. Red Panda Game said for him, it's the layout and components that grab him. Seeing tracks, places for workers, and scoring bonuses are things that lure him in. And added that Sankori is an example of a game he recently acquired because it just looked right for him. And I think that's kind of a similar idea, right? The mechanisms of the game are what you're looking for. Is this something that I really want to play? Wonderflonium said he likes to see how a game relates to others, as in if it's a follow-up to an existing game, adds a new spin to popular mechanisms, or is a continuation of a series, etc. Now, you didn't really clarify which one of those are good or bad, and maybe it's kind of nebulous, which makes sense to me, of course. I would tend to say that if it's a follow-up to an existing game, I may not want to really get involved. New spin on popular mechanisms is, well, kind of a rarity even these days, but certainly something that would catch most gamers' attention. Or then, yes, if it's sort of a continuation of a series. Now, of course, the 7th Everdell maybe isn't one that I need to get into, but if it's a game that, maybe you really like the first one. Like I was thinking of the Tidal Blades is a game where there's kind of been a series of them. I liked the first one. The second one was pretty good too. I haven't heard anything about a third, but that makes sense. So I'm kind of curious if there's, specifically things in those lists that you would or wouldn't lean towards. Agent83 said he'll use BGG to research the themes and mechanisms of a game to weed out those he doesn't care for, but also added that he likes to scope the video section of a game to see if his preferred reviewers have taken a look at it, as there are some who align well with his own interests. Yeah, exactly. I think that's probably one that we've now seen a couple comments on, is the themes and mechanisms are what we kind of lean towards. Like, okay, am I going to probably like this game? Yeah, it definitely has caught my interest. Maybe I need to go and do some further research and get some second opinions on it. And lastly, Jeremy Brooks said for him, it's table presence followed by components. He said he can always upgrade the pieces of a game, but it has to be appealing on the table in base form for him to grab it in the first place. And I think that's probably the most aligned with what I was thinking, right? Just that idea of, okay, I see some people playing a game on a table, and kind of to that comment, if I see a bunch of people sitting there with their hands of cards and that's it, I'm going to probably keep walking because, yeah, it's probably a trick taker or just some little abstract card game, and I just don't really get excited for those. If I see a lot of dice chucking, that looks neat. Oh, yeah, cool, bye, and I'm going to walk away. But if I see this big, vibrant board, maybe I see miniatures or pieces all over the place, if I see, like the concepts of city building or something like that, those are the ones that are going to kind of make you, sort of stop and look and, oh, what is this? Oh, maybe I should check out the rule book. Maybe I should look up this thing on BGG and see what it's about. Or just kind of ask, like, well, what's it do? Oh, it's worker. Oh, it's deck building. That kind of stuff, I think that's the sort of catalyst, right? That table presence is the first thing that you see. And from there, you then decide, do I want to take the next step to research that title? So yeah, that's definitely one that I can appreciate. That is it for question of the week. And I think I've already kind of covered my thoughts on the subject. So let's go ahead and talk about a whole bunch of recently played games. Okay, I have a lot of games to chat about. I think 8 of them. I don't think that goes to the next page. No, 8 games. And some of these, I do have a bit more to talk about than others. So I'm going to try and skim through some of these as quickly as I can to move on to the bigger and more substantial titles. Anyways, first up is Joyride Full Throttle. This is one of the 2 videos, or one of the 2 games I recently just released a video of in a Kickstarter preview format here on the channel. And for the 200-something people that watch this, thank you. I appreciate that. And hopefully you're here watching this as well. This is a standalone expansion to the game of Joyride, and that was Joyride Survival of the Fastest. I have Joyride Turbo, which was kind of all the expansions of the original version of the game included, all kind of lumped together. This is a much smaller thing. It's basically just this, and then you do have the option of buying some washed miniatures of not only the 6 cars in here, but the 9 cars that came with the Turbo Edition. You can kind of get all of that there. Now, a couple of things. So it's a racing game. It's a racing game that kind of uses dice, but there is a coasting mechanism or an inertia mechanism where you can kind of reuse dice from your previous turn, which you may or may not have rolled on that turn. They're just kind of, their value persists from turn to turn, and you can lock those dice in to continue your movement, and you don't have to roll your dice necessarily. You don't technically have to roll dice at all through this entire game, although you're going to have to probably do that a little bit for things that kind of work. But I really, really enjoy this system. All of it in a nutshell, I really like the way that this game works because I feel like you have a lot of control, even with a little bit of that randomness of the dice, which feels genuine to the idea of racing. Some things I can do very much controlled. Some things are still a little bit of chaos and craziness. But in general, I feel like you've got a lot of agency in this game, and I really, really like it. It is a standalone, which basically means that you just need this. You don't have to buy the base game. There's only a couple of components that you would need from the base game for this to only be an expansion. And I'll bet you it's probably all of like $5 or even less to put in the couple of damage tokens and then checkpoint tokens. And so it kind of makes sense to me that this is a standalone instead of being, excuse me, an expansion. I really like this. I've only got to play it once before I put out that video because very, very little of it has changed. It's mostly just some new cars, some new equipment, a new two-sided map board. The one thing I really, really liked in this are the new portals, which, though the rules of it are maybe a paragraph more than you'd like them to be, they're really not that complicated. But it lets you sort of, literally drive off one edge of the board and pop out somewhere else, or even pop in on another board if you have those that previous version of the game. And in fact, I mentioned to them, please consider adding extra portals because that would be really, really awesome. If we can kind of warp out of here and warp in on this board and then warp out of here and pop in on this board, you could just do some crazy stuff with those portals and make the map feel even bigger than it really is. I really, really like this. I mentioned that in that video. If you want to know more about this, be sure to check out that video here on the channel of Joyride for Throttle, but I also have an unboxing and a full review of Joyride Survival of the Fastest also here on the channel. Great game. I really, really like it. It's fun. It's a little chaotic. You do have to like racing games. It's not, anything more heavily involved than a racing game. But it's fun. I really, really like it. Joyride Full Throttle. Up next, we played Wandering Towers. I've talked about this one a couple of times. I do have the but I have the upgraded Etsy 3D printed towers in this. I finally got to play this with my wife and daughter using our now new copy. I think I won this again. I am currently undefeated in my 5 or so plays of Wandering Towers. It's a game where really you just got to kind of keep track of where your dudes are. And I think the fastest you can get your guys into the gold tower, the Raven's Keep, and get yourself off the board so that you don't have to worry about them getting trapped, or untrap them as soon as you possibly can. Like, okay, well, I know you just covered him up, so I'm going to go ahead and get him free so I don't lose track of him. I don't know if it's those kind of tactics that have kept me in the lead on this game. It was getting pretty close in this latest play. My wife and daughter, I should say my daughter, did very, very well with this. Her first game was pretty iffy, but we were all kind of getting close to the end when I finally dropped in my last wizard. Just a great game. I could see, and I think I've talked about this in the past, there is definitely some random chaos involved here. If people are covering up your wizards, they're then kind of trapped into these towers. You could sort of be anywhere in there and you don't know where your guy is, and you can't just go looking for him. You have to literally move a tower and reveal your wizard as part of your turn to then move that wizard and try and get him into Raven's Keep. But it's just a fun game, and I want to try and find some more of the little promos and expansions that give you some extra powers. It's a game where I think by default you only use 2 of these little power abilities that you can spend potions to then activate. They may give you some extra movement. They may let you cycle cards differently. They may let you move backwards. They might let you move towers to give you a little bit of extra control. And it tells you even in the rules, you can add as many of these powers as you want, which just makes the game more tactical, more thinky, because you're only going to get a certain number of potions based on player count. And so you've got to be thoughtful in how you trigger them when you use them. As I basically told my daughter, I would never use a power unless it was going to put a wizard in the tower where I need them to be to end the game. Otherwise, you're just wasting that ability because it may still not work out for you. Anyways, fun game. Wandering Towers. Okay, Now into some of the more meatier games to talk about. Up first, my buddy Daniel came over again this past week. We played another round of Speakeasy by Vital Lacerda. Now, I talked about this in the last episode. This is a big game about prohibition back in the 1920s, and you're trying to build speakeasies, nightclubs, casinos. You're trying to sort of operate on this board of Manhattan, and you've got uptown, midtown, and downtown. You've got all these different districts. I think there's 16 districts in the game, and you're going to be putting out these buildings in these different districts. But other things are going to happen in those districts as well. Some of them are going to start off with another mob, kind of another mob boss, or an AI character, you can kind of say an NPC, let's put it that way, already established in that area. And so if you want to knock them out, you have to have a higher strength rating than they do, which is just going to be put on a little token on the board. But then also you're going to have a couple of districts that are going to be under siege. You literally know ahead of time in the next round, which I think are called acts of play, in the next act, that district is going to be attacked by another mob. You don't know what the strength of that mob is going to be. And it's going to have a slight boost as a part of this mob war concept. And you're going to have to either weather that if you're there, or that'll just be another district that gets taken over by a mob, and then you're going to have to boot them out later if you want to move into there. There's also these police tokens. Again, a couple of those start off in play. More of them come out throughout the game. And if a district has a police officer in it, then all of your buildings have to be protected, which just means that you have a family member placed on the board next to that building. If a building is protected, then it is fully functional. But if a building is not protected and there is a police officer in that district, which just stays there, they never move. They sort of pop up each round. And again, you know where they're going to be in the next act. You know where they're going to pop up. But basically, if your building is unprotected and there's a police officer there, it's as if your building doesn't exist. And the rules are very, very, very specific about that. Beyond that, the whole game is this idea of leveling up your mob, making yourself stronger, being able to produce more barrels of alcohol, which I'll mention real quick. In the last episode of the Ratchet, I talked about Speakeasy and I kept saying rum. It's just barrels. It doesn't matter what the alcohol is. Any alcohol that I say is the same thing. Anyway, so you're going to be producing these barrels. You'll be able to produce maybe more of them as you level up your mob. You'll be able to sell more of those barrels in a single shot as you level up your mob. There's also like sort of have your own trucking enterprise. If you have a still that produces the barrels, you can use your little trucks to pick up those stills and run them all over town, dropping them off at the various speakeasies, nightclubs, or casinos, and then using a sell action to sell those off. And all this happens with these, I believe, 8 or 9 locations at the top of the board. You're going to trigger a location. Some of the actions are going to apply to any spot in that location. And I probably need to clarify, each location in the 2-player game has 1 or 2, again, NPC, just kind of characters. And so if I go to the nightclub, it's not a nightclub. Let me think about it. If I go to the docks has a single person. So if I go to the docks, I activate the docks, I get to do a couple actions there. No one else can go to the dock because only one player can ever go and visit a person at a location in each round. But I don't know, I can't remember all the names of the locations. One of them is the restaurant. The restaurant has, I think it also has one person, but that is the one location that any number of players can go to. So anyways, there's other of these locations, and they kind of have like a little column printed on them with just artwork of people at that location. And so for every person, that is a spot that one player can place one of their workers, which is a capo, the mob boss, the father, or whatever, at that location. And then once there is someone there, no one else can go there for the rest of that act. So anyways, for each location, there's usually going to be some common actions that any spot lets you go to, any of those NPCs lets you trigger. But then some of those NPCs will have a specific action that you can only do when you go to see them. And all of that is what makes this game really challenging, because you kind of go, okay, there's a lot of things I need to do. In the first act, you get 4 turns. In the second and third act, you get 3 turns. And in the fourth act, you get 1 turn. So there's 11 turns you get in the entire game. And you got a lot of stuff to do in that time frame. Getting your mobs upgraded, getting your strength up high enough to try and knock out other mobs, or get your strength up high enough to withstand an upcoming attack. Acquiring goons that you can kind of use to help bolster your strength for a momentary action. Getting family members not only onto your board, but then deploying those family members out to those locations. Producing the stills, moving the stills, selling, producing the barrels. See, I'm doing it again. Moving the barrels, selling the barrels, attacking a dock, attacking boats at the dock, which lets you actually acquire extra alcohol, extra barrels, and get some money, some other boosts, whatever else. There's an action where you can cook the books, and that's when you trigger certain goals throughout the game, kind of either printed on the board or in various tiles that come out during setup. You can basically say, hey, I accomplished that goal, cooking the book by putting a little book token there and giving yourself some extra rewards. There is I cannot remember the name of the track, but there's a main track that you go up, and it's basically like the reputation of your mob, and every time that you level up any of those tracks, you move up this main track. That determines how much your barrels get to sell for. You get little bonuses if you climb up that track. You can even get money added to your safe. You have money that sits in two places, sort of just in front of you, almost like cash in hand, and then money in your safe. Money in your safe can be spent during the game at a 2-for-1 rate. So if I need to spend $4, I can spend $8 from my safe. But at the end of the game, every dollar in the safe is a victory point. And in fact, your cash in hand and your money in the safe at that point is a 1-to-1 for victory points. Money is literally just how you win the game. There's so much stuff that you need to do in this game. And Daniel and I played this. Now, the first time we played this, and I talked about this in the last episode, there were a couple things that Daniel sort of thought he understood. Like he was collecting a whole bunch of these books tokens because he thought he was going to get to cook the books a lot and do a bunch of stuff until he realized what some of those goals required. A lot of those goals aren't going to trigger until a little later in the game, and he thought that he was going to have a bunch of them knocked out early and could gain a lot of points and bonuses, and that's not how it works. He also misread some of the iconography on some of those goals, and he thought, well, if I just have this and this, I'm good. No. They have to be in a specifically same district and such like that. And so he made a lot of missteps, just didn't quite, wasn't totally clear on some of the rules. Not his fault, not like, not listing whatever, but there's so much stuff that you've got to keep track of that little things like that can just slip by you. And so his score in the last game was like, I don't know, $180, and I had 2-something. In this game, we both broke 300. In fact, it was like 330 to 350. It was really close. And he was really kind of hard on himself. And I was like, well, man, you almost doubled your score. Like, you did great. And he goes, yeah, but I didn't have fun. And that really was like, well, that's a fair point. I can't argue with you on that one. As he put it, he said there were so many things that you're trying to do. In a lot of these Lacerda games, they work like chain reactions. Inventions is a huge title that does that. So I do this action, it bumps me up this track, that gives me something, or maybe lets me take an extra action, and that lets me flip this thing over. That gives me another thing, that now I can chain reaction over here. And you take one turn, it's like boom, 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 boom. You're doing all this stuff, and you feel really great about yourself. In this game, it's chain reacting costs. So I want to move up a track. But when I hit a certain spot on a track, I have to discard a card. Well, okay, so I go and I take this action. Well, this action also requires that I spend something. So, okay, I'm going to go do that action. I got to spend a card to trigger that. That's going to let me play a card. Okay, now I play a card. Well, hang on, that card also requires me to spend something or have something. And so I discard that. Oh, and then I also get to bump up this track. Oh, that's also going to cost me something. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh shit, I can't even pay for everything that I'm going to try and do this turn. Or I think I'm setting myself up for this next big move, only to then realize that you don't have the things in place anymore because you spent it all on the current turn. And so there's so much of this like, crap, I need this to do that, but I also need this to get something else done. And you're getting pulled in so many different directions. And like I said, there's so many stacking costs. There's not a lot of chain reacting in this game. There's not a lot of this lets me then do that. And this let also, I immediately get to move this or gain this or whatever. There's a little bit, but not very much. It's more the costs that seem to stack up on you. And so it just makes this game really, really, really difficult. It's really hard. And I could see that, especially if you've gone a turn or two where you overspent, which happened to me too, but it wasn't as bad as some of the things that he kind of caught himself or found himself caught in, and just could not do what he needed to do. And suddenly he realized, oh, I need 2 more turns to do this, but we only get 3 turns in this entire round, and I'm going to have my district hit by the next mob war, and I'm going to lose all my stuff because I can't afford it, because I can't get this one track moved up, because I'm 1 card shy of what I need to have. And that is one of those things where I almost kind of wish that in that executive action kind of thing that Lacerda is typically known for, there's not a lot of that in this game either. You can't just spend something to do something. You can't, like I said, you can spend money from your safe if you need some extra money, but there is no free action just like, hey, buy an extra card. Because the cards, which act as an extra way to do actions throughout the game and maybe bump up the tracks and do whatever you need to do, they're a big resource. You're constantly gaining and spending these cards, sometimes to do actions, sometimes literally just paying them as a cost to get something done. And so you need a shitload of them. And you can go from having 8 to suddenly having 2 really, really quick. And if all of a sudden, like I said, you find yourself just out of those cards, you're stuck. You can really be in a tight situation. And that's where Daniel found himself. And as he put it, like I said, he just didn't have fun playing it. And he's kind of decided, like, I think I'm just done with that game. I think he wants to borrow it and try it solo, although I don't know how hard he's going to be on himself if he does that. I still had fun with it. Yeah, it's hard. And again, I think if you're... I don't think Daniel's bad at planning ahead. I think he's pretty good at it. But it's still very easy to lose sight of one little thing. One little chain reaction costs, like, oh, shit, I don't have that card. And I can't do this. And it just breaks down everything I was working towards. It can be really frustrating. So I get it. Not for the faint of heart. Speakeasy by Vital Lacerda. Alrighty, up next, as my laptop keeps timing out because I'm taking too long to yammer. The next game I played is one that I have been excited to play literally for years. Yes, it is the next one to talk about. Folks, I finally got to play Philharmonix. This is a game, I talked about this in the last episode, I think the last episode. It is a game about building a orchestra on a spaceship, literally, and traveling around the galaxy, performing gigs, leveling up your orchestra, leveling up your ship, which actually doesn't really work like I thought it would, and just trying to do these gigs. It is essentially a order fulfillment game with an action selection mechanism that combines action points and worker placement. And there's a lot to cover here, and I'm going to try not to get super, super deep into this, but you've got a large board in the middle of the table with a galaxy printed on it with a bunch of different planets. The planets are arranged into 5 or 6 different colored wedges, and there are sort of 3 orbits almost. There's the inner planets, which are low value, the medium planets in sort of the middle, and then the outer ring of planets are a higher value, and that's going to kind of weigh in when you're performing those various gigs. You've got demand tiles placed at each of those wedges, each of sort of colored areas of planets are going to want to see a certain type of performance. They're also going to have various performers that you can hire, sort of like a special market of elite performers that you can hire. And on that note, your personal board has a bunch of different tracks, a bunch of different things to manage, but you also have a little 2-tiered orchestra riser set up in front of you, which, by the way, was the most frustrating thing to put together I have ever built in my life. I had to go back in and glue everything together because it was so fragile. I was like, there's no way in hell I'm building this again. And by the way, once you build all those things and glue them together, they don't fit back in the damn box using the insert that came with the game. Teshera, I hear you, buddy. Anyways, in that riser, you're placing these performers. There are 4 different types of main performers. You've got sort of like a brass, wind, drums, like a rhythm section, and strings. That's right. And then you also have spots for 5 specific soloists, and it's like, I don't remember what they all are, but there's like a singer, there's a keyboardist, and there's 3 others, like a rhythm section, something else like that. And each of the performers, the wind, the brass, the strings, and the rhythm section have 3 different levels. Actually 4. You can start with level 0. You start the game with level 0 of each, and they can get leveled up or replaced with higher skilled workers, up to 3 stars. The soloists are always a 2-star, which I thought was kind of odd. You would think that a soloist, by default, would be the most skilled. Anyways, what do I know? I've just, been in an orchestra for 16 years. It's fine. On that board, you've got rows where these little symphony tokens come out. So let me actually explain the performance venue aspect first. And that is that when you go to perform a gig, you have to perform at least one symphony. You have to perform a symphony. And each tile is going to tell you 2 symphonies that audience wants to hear. That tile is also going to tell you what 3 specific performers they want. So they may want a level 1 rhythm section, a specific soloist, let's say the keyboard one, and a level 2 strings player. You have to have at least one of the 2 symphonies and at least one of the 3 performers to perform in any of those planets where that tile is. And when you perform at a planet, you put a token on that planet. That planet can never be performed at for the rest of the game. And there are, I believe, 6 planets per region. And then also, if you're the first person to perform in that region, you put a little token on that tile to indicate that it is, the first performance there. You're going to get a bonus of some points for doing that. And then for every symphony that you are able to perform and every performer that you have exactly. So they wanted that level 1 rhythm section. If you have a level 2, more skilled, doesn't count. No. We want to hear James, the crappy drummer. That's who we want to hear. And you better show up. And so if you meet all those requirements, you can get up to 12 points. You get a standing ovation. You get a bonus 2 points for 12 points total, plus 3 points if you're the first person to perform in that region, in that round. And that's a lot of the source of scoring in the game. And then there's this whole thing where, like, the symphonies kind of get upgraded. You can only perform one of those symphonies a certain number of times. And then they kind of go into, like, a vault. It's called a slot on your board where they're going to then provide in-game scoring. That bit was kind of weird. But the musicians never upgrade unless you want to upgrade them. And now I'm going to go ahead and talk about the action selection mechanism of this game because it's funky. There are 6 actions in this game, and I can't remember them all right now on the top of my head, but you're able to hire musicians. You can improve your musicians, literally level them up to the next level. You can also level up your own conductor, and maybe I'll come back to that, but basically it kind of has to do with how many times you can play those symphonies. But then also, if you perform a symphony enough times by leveling up your performer, your conductor, then you can get more points at endgame. So anyways, you can gain new symphonies, you can perform, you can do other things. I can't remember what they all are. Movement on it, actually, interestingly enough, is something that you can do instead of taking a normal turn. So you can make some movement instead of actually triggering the action. Now, of these 6 actions, each one has 6 levels, like strengths of that action. And at the beginning of each round, you have these 6 tokens. You randomize them, you place them onto these 6 actions, and they tell you what level you'll be performing that action at that round and how many action points it will cost you. So let's say that the level up musician action is a level of 4. All right. A level of 4 is going to have a certain cost, but it's going to also let you get, say, 2 increases or sort of level ups of specific artists or your own conductor, but it's going to cost you a certain amount of resources. Now, if you could do it at a level 5, it may cost you a little more, but you're going to get an extra level up. If you could get it to a 6, it would be even cheaper, but you'd have the same number of level ups. So it's like your 1 and 2 is always the same rewards, but usually the 1 is more expensive than the 2. The level 3 and 4 are the same rewards, higher than a 1 and 2, but again, slightly higher cost, but 3 is more expensive than 4, so on and so forth. But when that little tile comes out, that is the highest that you can take that action at. You can take a lower version of that action if you do not have the resources to spend. You can go lower in that level, but you can't go higher unless you have fans. Like literally, hey, my orchestra has a fan section, whatever. And if you have 3 fans, you can only have up to 4. You can spend them to treat the action like it's 1 level higher. That's as high as you can go. So if it's a level 1, you can only possibly do it at a 2. You can't spend more and more fans and do it at a higher level. And that bit was weird. Because sometimes it's like, well, I want to go and I want to perform. But right now the performance is at a level 1. So I can still perform. I can get all the same points like normal. But there's also a little experience payout. There's an experience track as part of your ship. You're going to be spending experience throughout the game to do various leveling up, to do all kinds of different stuff. But I'm only going to get so much experience points at a level 1 performance. But it's only going to cost me 1 action point. Later on, if it's a level 6, well, I still get all the same rewards, but I'm gonna get a much higher kickback in my experience just based on the random placement of these tiles. And then sometimes you may get an action like, okay, well, I need to go and I need to hire somebody. I need like one musician, but there's a 5 on that action, which is going to let me do a whole bunch of recruiting, but I don't need to do that much recruiting, or I can't afford it. But I still have to spend all the action points. So at the bottom of your ship, there's another little track, and you start at 0. This is the part that was a little weird. You start at 0, and there's a limit of 9 to start off the game. So you can use 9 action points. Now, my wife was like, why don't you start at 9 and go down to 0? Well, good question, because you can exceed your limit of action points. So if my limit is 9, let's say I've used 7, and I want to take an action that's going to take 4 action points. It's got the little 4 token on that action. I go there, I got to exceed my limit of 9 by 2, right? 7 plus 4 is 11. I get to do that action, everything normal. That's fine. But then I have to pass at the end of that turn. Like I'm done, I've met or exceeded my action points, and so I have to pass. But since I've gone over, I'm going to lose a victory point for every spot past my limit. Now, again, using these fans I've talked about, you can spend your fans to decrease your spent action points. You can also spend some of your experience to reduce your action point. You could do that in a way in that if I'm at, say, 6 and my limit is 9, and I want to take a 3-point action, well, that would give me 7, 8, 9. That would perfectly meet where I need to be. But if I spent 2 of my fans, or I think 4 of my experience, I can drop myself down to 5, take that 3-point action. Now I'm only at 8 of 9, and I'm going to get another turn, which I could even use that turn to just move my ship or gain a little bit of money and still hit that cap of 9, but I've kind of gotten myself a little extra edge. Now, the first person to pass gets a little bit of a benefit going into the next turn. You kind of get like just a little miniature reward when you pass. You move up this track, you put yourself on your turn order, and the bonuses on the left of that turn order are a little better than the bonuses to the right. And then, of course, you'll get to go sooner in the next round, etc., etc. And I know I've waffled on a lot about this, but this was a game that I was really, really excited to play. So let me say a couple of things. I could go in a lot more detail about the turns and the actions and all this kind of stuff. I was pretty disappointed in the presentation of this game. Generally, it looks okay, but you got a lot of blacks and dark grays and kind of browns and dark palette colors. The game doesn't pop. I mean, even, and I want you to look at this. If you look right here on the bottom of the box, it looks probably to you black. But from here, I can actually see that there's the back of little alien heads in the chairs of the auditorium. I'm sorry, you've been probably looking at the glare for a minute. But anyways, there's very faded artwork here that depicts the audience of this orchestra performing on this box. You can't see it. I mean, even from like here, I can barely see it. And they did that throughout the game. The entire palette of this game is just mostly very, very dark. The little symphony tiles that you have to perform at the different locations are just a square tile with a white background with a little colored shape on it and a little audio wave symbol. That's it. Very, very boring looking. It would have been nice if there was something that even kind of depicted like fake alien songwriters, composers, and sort of provided just a little bit more of a personal touch, right? To kind of make it feel like, oh, we're performing the 7th Symphony from or whatever the alien's name is, right? So I just kind of felt like that was a little bit of a letdown. The whole action selection side of the board just looks busy. It's just a bunch of numbers and Roman numerals and arrows and symbols. It just doesn't look great. The game played fun. I did typically enjoy it. My wife actually beat me in this. Just my wife and I played it, and she beat me by a pretty decent margin. And I think a couple things that I did wrong was that, first of all, I was trying to get to that perfect performance. I did not do a single performance until I had all the symphonies and all the people that region wanted to hear. And it took me 3 rounds of a 5-round game to finally perform that gig. And I wasted way too much time in doing that. I should have been doing it much sooner. Also, and I mentioned that there's this action point tracker and that limit is 9, well, that limit can go up to 15, which means theoretically you can get extra turns in each of those 5 rounds if you manage to level up that point tracker or the action tracker. And we never did that. My wife nor I ever got above that 9. And with the fact that you don't want to lose your victory points, right, we rarely ever spent more than 9. And if we did, we try to do it in a way that we could mitigate that victory point loss. I really think we should have spent some time as quickly as we could notching that up. And I think that was another thing, is that we tried to take actions when it had the highest reward, at, of course, the expense of then wasting a whole bunch or spending a whole bunch of your action points. So yeah, okay, I'm going to get to go here and recruit 3 musicians. Great. But that's going to use up 6 of my 9 action points. And so you may have a whole round where you go maybe 2 or 3 actions because you haven't upgraded that action tracker. So I think that was a mistake that we both made as well. I definitely want to play it again. I'm also really kind of bummed in that, like I said, the assembly of this thing was kind of wonky. Some of the components are kind of a little wonky. They're not really bad. It's not the worst game I've ever seen. But this company, Arcona Games, is not necessarily known for gorgeous production. I think they kind of get by with what they have. They're a fairly small publisher, and so there's a little bit of that. It's just kind of a notch behind in terms of production. But also, there's a misprint on a couple of the musician tiles. Not a huge deal. A little sticker can take care of it, but that's a little bit of a bummer. Also, I didn't get a solo rulebook in here at all. That's a big bummer, especially because the only one I could find online was in French. So I really had mixed feelings on this. I'm generally leaning towards the positive. If I had to do this on a 10-point scale, I would say 6.5 to a 7. I think if I can kind of figure out some of the systems a little better and kind of understand the game a little bit better, I can probably improve that by having a better game overall. But yeah, a couple of opportunities certainly missed here with Philharmonix by Arcona Games. Okie dokie. So over the weekend, my wife and daughter went out of town. I went to go visit my buddy Daniel at his place. I haven't ever played a game at his house. So I went over to go visit him. And the first game that we played was Through the Ice and Snow. You know what? I looked up the publisher and such on this, but it's not on this computer, so I can't rattle it off. The only thing I remember is that the publisher is Two Tomatoes Games, something like that. And the designer is not an English-speaking designer, which isn't a problem, although I did understand from Daniel that the rulebook was very, very difficult to understand, and there's a lot of people out on BGG that were trying to understand, get sort of clarifications and such on the rules. So be that as it may, Through the Ice and Snow is a game about exploring and surviving the Northwest Passage between Britain and sort of like the Arctic. And the idea is that each player represents a ship in a convoy that is trying to explore and navigate the Northwest Passage. You have to start off in this right section of the map. You have to then explore across this map. The map is made of multiple tiles that aren't visible at the very beginning of the game. The idea is that when you at the beginning of each round, someone is going to be the lead navigator. At the beginning of the game is whoever has the most dynamite, and there's a couple of sort of tiebreakers there. But then throughout the game, you have a chance to basically become the leader for the next turn. And so you've got these different routes that you can take. There's all these different islands that you're trying to sort of navigate around. And the boards are actually reversible, so that you could have literally a different map. The islands will all be in the same place, but the routes that you can take to get across the passage can change from game to game. And that's interesting because at the beginning of the game, you get a couple of places. Basically, you have like some corporate sponsors, and they want you to visit and specifically map certain regions of the passage, right? But you don't know where you're going to be able to get to at the beginning of the game. And so that was a very difficult opening decision to make, is which of these sponsors do I choose? Which islands am I going to try and get to specifically and navigate, and map, I should say, on my turn. Anyways, you've got a player board in front of you, and this thing is laden with tracks. So you have a health track, a morale track, a fuel track for your ship. You have a little track that tracks how many Inuits you have sort of recruited to your team. It's just kind of something that assists you. It's not really a track that you have to manage specifically. The entire perimeter of your board is a food track, which is very, very key in this game. And then you also have, there was one other track. Oh, there's your entire like sled dog track. And there's actually two components to that. There's a little spot you can put a disc that sort of slides up this track as you can literally level up your sleigh. But then you can also add dogs to your sleigh. And the higher point of your sleigh level and the highest dog that you have kind of gives you a victory point marker of how many points your sled is worth. Whenever you would go explore, you'll gain points. There was one part of the game I thought was kind of weird. But the whole game is about managing the health and the morale of your ship, trying to keep your fuel adequate to, make each of these voyages. You have to have food. You got to feed all your people at the end of each round because board games. And then, of course, you're trying to get points throughout this entire time. There's a bunch of different ways to get points. I can't even remember all of them. But one of them, of course, is mapping out these regions. If you map out a region, you're going to get some points. And I think that even kind of snowballs throughout the game. You're discovering new species of animals. There are actually 2 decks of animals that come out in each round. The number of species to explore is actually determined by some artwork on the board itself. Each region kind of has a different number of animals that you might discover. And then when you discover those species, that's a specific action. You put that card in front of you. If you're the first person to find it, you get 5 points. You can also then literally sacrifice that species throughout the game to provide extra food if you need it. But if you still have it by the end of the game, you're going to get some extra victory points. And then if you have the most animals at the end of the game, you're going to get some victory points. You can also go hunting. You don't get points for hunting, but you will get food and, most importantly, restore your health track when you go hunting. There's a couple different ways to get morale, but morale was a little bit harder to come by. We played a little variant of this that gave us each a unique player power and a unique ship, and my particular player power gave me a way to keep getting morale. And it's important because you don't have a lot of health. You have a very, very short health track. You have a morale track that's only a pip longer. And at each turn, after you determine where we're going to go and how we're going to get there, your morale and your health automatically decline. They drop 1 spot. And if the health gets too low, people start to get injured. You basically have workers who go into an infirmary that cannot be used in the current round. And of course, if you drop further on the health track, literally people start dying, and you have to start, getting rid of your own workers. You have 3 specialized workers: a captain, a carpenter, and a scientist. And then you have 3 generic workers who don't fit any of those requirements, but there is a worker spot board, just a small board kind of in the middle of the table. And it has various action slots divided into 3 columns. So there's a column for the captain, a column for the carpenter, a column for the scientist, and each one has a certain number of actions that require a certain number of workers. So, for example, you can take the token to be the first player in the next round, to be the lead navigator, and all you need to do is send your captain there. And he just takes the little cog wheel, little ship's wheel, and you're going to be the first player in the next round. But if you want to go and explore and discover a new species of animal, your scientist has to lead that and someone else has to go with him. It can be one of your other 2 specialists, although that would be unwise, or you can send one of your 3 just supporting crew members, or you can even recruit Inuits throughout the game, and they will join your crew. You have to keep them fed, and they will act as additional workers. There are even some worker spots on that board where maybe your scientist can go, or an Inuit, with the idea of the theme kind of being that, well, hey, those Inuits are specialists in this area. They may not be a scientist, but they know the area, they know the way around, they know how to work with other indigenous people who live there, and so they can fulfill that role of the scientist instead of sending the scientist. So the more of those Inuits that you can get, the more of those specialized actions that you can take. And I could talk a lot more about the stuff that happens in this game. What was kind of interesting is that Daniel made this thing sound really nasty. He really made it sound like, man, if you run out of food, literally there's this whole idea that if you cannot feed your people, you have to spend your dogs first. We kind of know what's happening there. If you run out of dogs and you still haven't fed all your people, then you have to start losing people, and we know what's happening there too. And then eventually you just start losing victory points. I mean, if you've spent everything you can possibly spend to try and feed your people, you just keep losing victory points. And so you're talking about how hard that is and like all the difficult things and like how some of the theme is like a little dark because of how dangerous and how difficult it was to explore this Northwest Passage. And so I was really kind of nervous about this. We've been talking about playing this game for a long time. It really wasn't that hard. None of us ever hit the lower spots on the morale track or the health track. None of us ever ran out of food. There is this idea that if you run out of fuel, the other players have to tow you. He kind of quickly explained how that track worked, but we never got to actually see it happen. None of us ran out of fuel. He was really low for a lot of the game, but he never ran out. You can upgrade your ship, which gives you some abilities throughout the game. Like I said, we had asymmetrical characters that gave us some special abilities. Some of those ship upgrades are pretty nice. I had one that just gave me extra food each round. That was great. And the whole like navigating and getting certain islands sort of worked, sort of didn't. There was one particular spot where I took control and I moved us where I wanted us to go. Okay, I explored that region. I put a little token on there. One of my 3 objectives are met. And then I literally held back for a round. I didn't take the lead in the next round. And if I did, I would have scored 10 more points at the end of the game. I didn't. He swung us up a different direction on the map, and there's no way to come back. You have to sort of head in this generally east to west path on the board. There's no way to loop back around. There's no way to head the opposite direction, at least I know of. And so I kind of just lost a whole bunch of points in that sort of event. There's also on the action board, on the bottom of the main action board, there were 6 extra actions you can take only in the penultimate location on the map. And that's a way that you can grab some last minute end game points. Like, okay, basically you're kind of celebrating the things that you've accomplished in that voyage. So, for example, I took a spot at the very end of the game that gave me 3 points for every upgrade I had in my ship. I had all 4 upgrades in my ship, so that was 12 points. There was a spot you can go that gave you victory points for how many rifles you had left over at the end. I only had 3, but it was still 3 extra points. And I'm chuckling because if Daniel had done that, he'd have won the game, and he forgot about it, and so I won the game by 2 points. But anyways, It was really kind of interesting. It was not a game that I think I need to run out and get this. Not even a game that I think I need to run out and play this thing again. Like I said, it wasn't nearly as unforgiving as he had kind of made it sound like it could be. Certainly, yes, the challenge of the theme is there. You're constantly pulled between, I need to get these tracks bumped up so that I don't have scurvy or die, or there's not a mutiny on my ship, or I run out of food and I got to eat the dogs. Like, there's a lot of stuff you got to manage there. But if you do that, and if you're just careful with how you allocate your workers, you can do those things and you can still go and discover new species. You can build cabins across the Northwest Passage, which can give you some extra endgame points and such. But it's just that literally juggling those 2 things. Stay alive, score victory points. And it was neat. Like I said, it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. I didn't think it was going to be a bad game. I thought it was going to be a very harsh game, but it really wasn't that harsh. I wouldn't say that it was a lot of fun. I was like, oh my God, it was so exciting. And I found a bear and I hunted another bear. It's weird, but whatever. So it was cool. I'm glad I got to play this. I'm glad we finally got to kind of knock this off this list. I know it was a game that he's been excited to trying to play competitively. He's always played it solo. And so it was a neat game, Through the Ice and Snow. We played one more game. I've talked about this one before, so I'm not going to delve into it too much. This is Mistwind by First Fish Games. This is a pick up and deliver with a route building and an engine building type mechanism. So you've got to try and establish routes across all these different locations. It's a very, very weird board. It's a very, very abstract game in just its appearance, but you have these giant floating whales. It's not a sentence you can kind of just say and pretend like you didn't say it. But you have these giant floating whales, and they can carry one piece of cargo. You're picking them up from various locations where that cargo is sort of generated. Just the iconography on the board tells you I can go there and get that resource. But then there are these capital cities and these capital trade hubs, and if you can drop off those resources at either of those locations, you'll just gain some points. And also, whoever delivers the most goods to each of the 4 regions of the map will get extra points at the end of the game. You're doing all this by using an action selection mechanism around the board. There are sort of like worker locations on the left, worker locations on the right, character cards you can purchase on the top, and then special trade route cards you can trigger on the bottom. You're doing all that with a stack of poker chips numbered 1 through 5. At the beginning of each round, you have to choose one of your 5 poker chips that you will not use, literally removing it from the game for that round. And then on your turn, you're going to place out those poker chips. You can only place 1 poker chip on the left, top, and right edges of the board per round. So if I've taken location number 5 to get resources, I cannot then also play on location 2, for example. And if I bought character card number 4, I can't then go and buy character card number 1. On the right side is where you're going to get a lot of actions, and you're going to trigger one of those actions with one of your poker chips each round. The trade route bonuses on the bottom of the board, you can go there as many times as you want. Of course, you can only still place a chip in the appropriate location. So you cannot, for example, play 2 of your chips on the same spot, because you always have to match up the number 1 to 5 on each of those edges. But on the trade routes on the bottom of the board, you're going to place there to get an action, and at the end of the round, whoever was the most recent chip played there gets a little bonus printed on the bottom of that card. And that's really the whole thing. So like I said, you're trying to move goods around. You're trying to establish these routes. The idea is that when you leave a location, as you're moving your big whales, when you're leaving a location, if you don't have a tower there or another one of your floating whales, you have to spend a krill resource to leave that location. But if you have any of those things there, your movement from that location is free. And so as you're playing the game and you start putting out your little hubs and moving your ships around, building more of your ships, you start with 1, you got to build your other 2. Suddenly you can traverse the entire board for free, really, if you play things correctly. And so you can start moving goods around all over the place. Now, each floating whale can only pick up 1 good or drop off 1 good a turn. Basically, you make your movements, and then you either pick up or deliver, and then that's your turn. Daniel's not a big fan of pick up and deliver. I like it. I don't have a problem with it. But he really liked the route building aspect added on top of that in Mistwind, and the sort of engine building nature of some of these character cards that you're buying may give you special abilities, maybe a one-time use, maybe an ongoing. Managing the resources of what you have to work with can be a little tricky. Building things requires steel or wood, or usually steel and wood, and so managing those resources can be a bit of a challenge. There was one particular round where he took a trade route bonus on top of me, got to then build a whole bunch of his hubs in a specific region of the board, and in one turn went from being almost nowhere on the board to having half the board covered. And then for the rest of the game, of course, he was able to start zipping around all over the place. I was planning on doing that, but I didn't get the bonus because he placed his chip on top of mine. And that set me back just enough throughout the entire game. I was kind of behind him by 1 or 2 turns to hit various milestones, but only one person can hit them. So he kind of beat me to a bunch of scoring opportunities throughout the rest of the second half of the game. And so he beat me in this. He got a really good score. He really had a good game of this, and he really enjoyed it. And he was like, yeah, this is definitely a pick up and deliver game that he could get into. That is Mistwind. We then went last night, we went to the Cask and Stave speakeasy we like to go to, just my wife and I broke out Comic Hunters. This is a game that was absolutely a huge hit in Argentina, I believe, or maybe it was Brazil. It may have been Brazil. Someone had sent this. The story of this game truly is that someone sent a copy of this in Portuguese from Brazil to Mike DeLisio of the Dice Tower. Mike DeLisio played it, loved it, spoke about it on the Dice Tower channel, and suddenly everybody in the world wanted a copy of this. And of course, everyone in the Dice Tower played it, started popping up on top 100 lists and such, and everyone wanted a copy of this game. I bought 2 copies from Brazil 2 years ago to take to the Dice Tower retreat, traded one away, kept one for myself, because the understanding was that this would never come out in the US because, of course, they would have to get the license for Marvel, which then Arcane Wonders pulled off. And so this is actually the Arcane Wonders version of the game printed in the US. And so I still have my Portuguese version over there, never played, because I was going to have to get stickers and print stickers and modify the board. The game components are, language independent, but the board is not. And so I just never got around to printing the stickers, all that kind of stuff. And then, bam, I got it for like $15 from Barnes & Noble. This is very simply put, it is a drafting game where you're collecting comic books. There are basically two major ways to score points. In the game, you're going to have a certain number of superheroes that are going to be on this kind of priority track. So when my wife and I played it yesterday, for example, Iron Man was the most popular comic, most popular hero, if you will. And then Thor and Captain America were second level. And then we had Doctor Strange, Black Widow. I'm not a huge superhero guru. I should probably mention this. So I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Anyway, Spider-Man, Black Widow, and Doctor Strange were kind of like the third tier. And then there were certain goals that we're looking for. And I think there's 5 or 6 in the entire game. So we wanted first edition, we wanted like ultra rare or diamond copies, whatever that meant. And then we wanted epic battle games. So it had like a little versus logo. And each of these cards that you're drafting will have one or more superheroes printed in the top left corner of the card. And then it'll have one or more of these specific tags along the left side of the card as well. And then they'll have a level, 1, 2, or 3. There's 4 different mini games in this game, and in each round of the game, you're going to play 3 of those different mini games to get the cards into your hand. So the first one is, what's it called? The first one is, I can't remember. Not a pawn shop. What's it? I don't remember. But the first one is literally just you take a number of cards, you draft one, you pass. You draft a card, you pass. In the 2-player game, you draft one and trash one, and then pass. So you're actually able to kind of deny cards to your opponent. And then you have one that is like an auction. You're going to put a row of cards per player, 1 row per player of cards. The cards have different numbers in them. And then or number of cards, I should say. And then whoever's the first player is going to launch an auction. Okay, I'm going to start the bidding on this row of cards. I'm going to start the bidding at $5. You have literally a supply of $15 through the entire game. You're only going to do 2 auctions. It's the only time you're going to spend money. You cannot make any money. But you're going to be able to spend that $15. At the end of the game, any money you have left over just turns into victory points. So there's an auction. And then there is there's probably a name for it, but this one's supposed to be like a flea market where you start off with 1 row of cards per player. So we had 3 rows. For a 2-player game, we have 3 rows. And whoever's the first player is going to draw a card from the deck and choose which row to put it in. And so then when it's your turn, you can either draw a card and add it to one of those rows, or you can choose one of the rows and take all the cards, and then you're done in that particular round. There's probably another name for that, because I've seen that in other games. It's not Zootopia, or is it Zootopia? There's another animal drafting game that has that same kind of mechanism where you can either add to a stash or take the stash that's there. And so there's that. And then the last one is a convention. The convention has you laying out this huge grid of cards on the table. We were playing on these little tables at the Speakeasy, and it was a little tight. But you had this large grid of cards, and then when it is your turn, you are allowed to move 1 card into any open areas. It has to be able to slide. So the first player has limited options. Okay, I can slide 1 card into an opening. Then you name a superhero, and you pick a row or column of this grid and take all the cards that has that superhero on it. So you can move something in to just try and, I'm going to be able to grab 4 cards instead of 3, maybe, if that superhero is printed. And then, of course, as that sort of thins out, you're going to have more motion that you can move a card, but overall probably less cards to choose from. You're going to get the draft from that twice. So like I said, you're doing 3 drafting games, and then you do a collection phase. When you have the collection phase, you're going to have a bunch of cards in your hand. You're going to choose which ones you want to actually add to your collection, and you're going to pay for those cards by discarding other cards. So I mentioned that each card has a level 1, 2, or 3. If I want to keep a level 3 card in my collection, I have to discard cards adding up to or exceeding 3. And so typically what we do is we kind of just start putting the cards out. Okay, like I really want to play these cards. That's going to be a total of 15 value, I only have 13 in my hand. So maybe I can try and find one to pull back and use as currency that drops us from 15 to 14, increases my hand from 13 to 14. So I'm spending 14 value to play out 14 value in cards, and then you add them to your collection. Each collection can only be on one superhero. So even though you may have a bunch of comic books with Iron Man and other characters, you either have an Iron Man collection or you move those cards into a collection of the other heroes in that comic book. And all the comic books, by the way, are actual comics. They're actual volumes, episodes, whatever, editions, issues, whatever the hell the word is, of existing comic books going way back in the old days of Marvel, which is pretty cool. Like I said, I'm not super, I mean, I've watched all the movies, most of them at least, but I'm not really a comic book character person kind of a thing. But anyways, this was fun. It's a neat game. Like I said, it's a lot of drafting. I've talked in the past before where I really don't love games where you're discarding cards to keep cards. Like the Race for the Galaxy kind of mechanism and other games like that. But it's fine. It's not a very lengthy game. It's not a very involved game. Even in the dimly lit environment of this nightclub that we were playing in, we still really had no problem playing this. And it's just nice. My wife actually really enjoyed it. She also kicked my ass in this game. But she had a really good time with this, and I could see this being a game that we continue to bring out to that Speakeasy in place since there was just enough room for it to fit. That is Comic Hunters. All right, the last game. We played this just today. I didn't bring the thing over because there's a ton of stuff in this box. We played the Big Box edition of Redwood. This is a game about photographing elements of the wild. You're on this very large circular board. The board is arranged into 5 kind of like wedges of different biomes. You've got a river, you got mountains, you got a forest, you got plains, even kind of, it's not really a desert, but it's kind of like dried plains versus kind of like a meadow type environment. And all over this board, you got all these little holes and all these little art symbols and such printed on the board. The holes are for various animals to get placed in throughout the game, but then also each of those areas has flowers and sequoia trees printed on that board. And what you're doing is you have these little plastic pawns, and you're going to start off on one of the signposts on the perimeter of this board. At the beginning of your turn, you're supposed to pick a movement vector, which are these little thin pieces of plastic, and it kind of almost looks like one of the tracks in the old game of Sorry. You know how Sorry had the little dot and then the line and then the arrow on the end? It's almost like that. It's got a dot. Usually that path is kind of curved, and then there's actually a little fork on the end because that fork actually snaps onto your character pawn. And then you can spin that path anywhere around your character, and the other end, where the solid kind of ring is where your character moves to. Now you get 2 characters in the game, so you of course snap the movement vector to your active character, pivot wherever you want it to go, and then use your second character to kind of hold it there and pull your old character and the movement vector out of the way, and that is now where you have moved to. Very much like a tabletop miniature kind of a game. You then are also going to choose a camera lens. Now you're supposed to do all this at the beginning of your turn. Choose your movement vector and your camera lens at the same time. For us, that's very, very difficult. So we've kind of house ruled it where you move first and then pick up your camera lens, because I can just envision a photographer trying to run through a field while fumbling with the camera case, trying to get the lens out. Like, it just doesn't really seem super realistic. But anyways, the camera lenses are also these plastic pieces that snap to your character. They have kind of like a little line axis in the middle. They have little holes in them. And then same thing, you're going to slide that lens vector around your character after you have moved. And anything that lens piece completely covers is in your photo. So if even the tiniest little bit of an animal tile or a flower or a sequoia art symbol on the board is sticking out from the edge, either the far edge or the sides of that lens, then it's not in your photo. If you've completely covered those symbols, then you take those components from the box. There's like an extra little piece that represents what all those things are, the flowers, the animals, whatever. You place them. You actually take a card where your camera lens is pointing at. You kind of draw a straight line. It even comes with a shoelace that you can literally use to kind of figure out exactly where you're aiming at, because the outer perimeter of that board represents the backdrop of what you're shooting towards. So if you're aiming towards the mountain range, then you're going to take a mountain backdrop card, put that in front of you. The card has anywhere from 2 to 4 little spots on it where you can place the tokens of the things that were in that photograph, the animals, the flowers, the trees, whatever. If you have more than what fits in that card, you just lose them. And if you don't have enough things to fill that card, then any open spots are going to lose you a point at the end of the game. And there's also this thing where each of those cards, each of those backdrops actually blends into the next backdrop. So your goal is to try and take the pictures in the right order, either direction around that board, and then you build this continuous backdrop. You can add cards to either end of your photo reel, but you can't insert cards in the middle. And so that's a careful thing you gotta try and do. You're also trying to get like one shot where the sun's in the background, and there's all these extra little things. There's these different goals that come out throughout the game. The first goal will almost always be a perfect shot requirement. I mentioned there's little holes in the lens pieces. If at any point you get something visible through that hole in the lens, then you got a perfect shot of whatever that thing is. And as long as you get a perfect shot of something, then you will typically get an extra point. Your points are these really cute little pine cone tokens, and so you're getting the pine cones throughout the game. You all these different scoring things you're trying to work towards. A lot going on in this game, and it does require, even the rulebook tells you that a millimeter difference can have a big impact in this game, and so you've got to be very careful in how you do things. Now, we wanted our daughter to play this, and I knew this game was going to be hard for her because of how precise you have to be. So we did all kind of take a little bit of freedom in how we did this. There was one shot where, I mean, literally she was a millimeter off and she wasn't going to hit this flower and she was going to, lose some points, whatever. And I said, oh, just nudge it. Just lean as you're taking that picture. It's fine. And I think that makes the game, if you're that close, just give it to them. Like it's, for my wife, okay, like the entire tail of the animal is sticking out. No, okay, that doesn't count. And it's fine. But even I had one where I was like, I grabbed the wrong damn lens and now I don't get any of this stuff. She goes, here, just use my lens. Just change. We were standing right next to each other on the board anyways. That's fine. Here, just use this. And so we allowed ourselves a little bit of freedom with this. And it did make it a lot more fun. It really did. Like I said, we also did a thing where basically we moved and then we picked our lens. Because then we could kind of see a little better like what we were going to be able to get into that shot. I've played this game a couple of times. In fact, and I've mentioned this before on the channel, the first time I ever played this game was with Shem Phillips at Gen Con 2 years ago. And Chris Yee, the Dice Tower, and I think one other person, one of Shem's employees or buddies or something like that joined us. And Chris Yee destroyed us. I had a miserable score, but it was better than Shem's. I played it with my wife, and I think she beat me again. I want to say I played it again this year, but I couldn't find it in my lineup. This was the first time I ever won this game. I just had a pretty decent game. I didn't get a lot of the objectives, but a lot of the objectives were really hard to get. I did get my bonus of all my photos in order. A lot of stuff just kind of worked out for me. My wife and daughter were only 1 point apart, so they were both pretty happy with that. This deluxe edition adds a bunch of stuff. It adds a whole set of expansions, which are modular based. So like we had a base camp that you could just kind of move to. There's some artwork on the board. Like one area is like a mountainous path with a river. I think maybe it's the forest. No, I think it was the mountain pass. It just has a river that runs through it. And if at any point you're on that river at the beginning of your turn, instead of picking one of those movement vectors, you can take a canoe and you can move yourself anywhere along that river as long as part of your miniature is touching the miniature or touching the river artwork on the board. You can just go anywhere. If your character is on one of the signposts at the beginning of your turn, you can take the bicycle and move to any other signpost around the board. And that was kind of neat. Some of the stuff was kind of neat. There was this, you can see in these pictures, there was a large sequoia piece that was put into the board. That was also an expansion component. But it was kind of weird because when you're taking your lens can only lay over top of the base of that sequoia tree because it is a physical plastic piece. You can't hit the trunk of the tree. The trunk is just, you can't aim in that direction. You also can't move through the tree, which that makes sense. So we got to play with that. There were a couple other things that this expansion added that was kind of nice. And there was some extra, like there was a paraglider movement tile that you could use. There's also 3 large boards that hold all these different vectors and lenses. Although I will say, we finally opened this copy today. For folks who have been watching the Ratchet for a while, I actually bought this for my wife in August as a birthday gift, and we finally today got to open it and play with it. But we found out that I'm actually missing a movement vector. We got 2 of the one piece and none of the other piece, so I gotta try and see if I can't get a replacement. I might be able to 3D print something using really thin plastic, but it's still going to be tricky. It's not going to be as flexible as the plastic that comes with the game. So hopefully I can get a replacement, although this game is a little on the older side. Anyways, this is really, I'm glad we got to finally play this. I don't think the expansion is really necessary, though I do like the variety of stuff that it adds. It also adds different animals that you can play as, but you either all play with the new animals or you all play with the old animals. There's no difference in the animals except for that some of the animals are harder to photograph. There's actually specific rules on how you can photograph these new animals. There is also, for each of those backdrops I mentioned, okay, you take a backdrop card, you put the stuff on it. You can play an expert level where you actually flip the cards over. In some of the spots, you just put the token on like normal, but some of them it's like, well, you can photograph a bear. If you photograph a bear, you can put the bear on this piece. But if the bear's not in the shot, you just can't put anything there. So you're going to have that open spot and you're going to lose the points. And I was like, man, I could see that being hard to the point of being frustrating. Because the one thing that is really key about the game, and I finally started to learn it with this play, is that you don't just think about what do I want to get in my shot and what do I want my backdrop to be. You have to actually look at the backdrop card that you will be taking on your turn, see how many things you have to have on it, and try like hell to get that much stuff in your shot. Because if you know that you're going to be picking up a card that has 4 symbols on it, and you can only see 2 things you can easily get into that shot that still points at that backdrop, you got to be really careful in where you put your guy and how you shoot that shot. And then lastly, with like 3 or even 4 players on the board, we had a couple times, the 3 of us, we were kind of getting each other's way. Like, well, crap, I can't actually go here and shoot because your person's in my way. And same thing, you're not able to lay a camera lens piece over top of another player. They're in your shot, and that wouldn't work for a nice nature shot, right? Anyways, neat game. Glad we got to play this. Still not my favorite game, to be honest with you, because of the precision that it kind of requires. But like I said, if you kind of fudge things a little bit and just let yourself enjoy it, it's a better experience. That was Redwood Big Box. And that is the 82nd episode of the Weekly Ratchet. Real quick, let me talk about question of the week for next week. What was it going to be? Yes, I remember. What is a game that you love at a particular player count and hate at a different player count? That is a weird thing with games, that sometimes they just work better or worse at different player counts, and I think that'll be a pretty interesting conversation, don't you? Folks, that is it for the episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for the comments, as always, especially a big welcome to our first-time posters. Hope to hear from all of you again soon, and until then, cheers.